Hello everyone, Nadezhda here, and in today's lesson we are going to learn how to create these custom line styles using the detail item and the generic annotation families. These are essentially the array families, so we are going to learn the basis of working with the array tool in Revit, and then we are going to learn how to set these lines up graphically. So let's begin. On my screen you can see the three different families, and today we are going to learn how to create all three of them one by one, because even though these families are very similar, they do have some sort of differences in the methodology of their creation. So let's begin first with this one. I'm just going to get rid of this window and I'm going to start from the empty window. The first step of creating each of these three families is actually creating that first repeating component that is needed to create this line. So first I'm going to then create the new family and I'm going to choose the detail item family. I need this one, so I select it and I click open. Now, since I want this family to have some sort of flexibility, I'm going to be adding some parameters in it. So I first need a couple of reference planes. So I'm just going to add a couple of random reference planes. And I'm also going to add a reference plane for height. And in order for this family to work, I'm just going to add some dimensions so I can set up how I want my family to look. So I am going to add the dimension here and I'm going to just make sure that it is, for example, 80. And here I can go with 60. This doesn't matter for now, we can just get it to be, for example, 250. And then I'm just going to repeat these distances. So this one is going to be 60. And this one is going to be 80. I can also add the height of, for example, let's say 50. And now I can see with this height that this width is a little bit too much, so I just move it around a little bit. So now I take the Align tool and I simply draft what my family will look like. So I want it to be something like this. Essentially, my goal is to have this family repeat numerous times and then create the line style as it is. I also want to have some flexibility when it comes to actually the distances. I do want to be able to change this, to change some of these values. So here I am going to be adding the parameter and I'm just going to get rid of this distance and create it as the separate distances. And I will select this value and I will create the new parameter. I'm going to call this parameter the A parameter. You can either leave it as type or you can create it as instance. In this case, I will leave it as type and I click OK. Next, I do the same for these two and I'm going to call them the B. I click OK and I need the height, so I call this the H parameter and I need this width. So I'm just going to create this parameter and I click OK. Now we have constrained these reference planes, but we do also need to constrain these lines to be aligned to reference planes. So I take the Align tool and I first constrain these lines to this main plane. I make sure that I lock it to this plane. So essentially I click first on plane and then I click on the line and then I click lock. We do the same for this upper plane. And now it's a little bit different for these other lines. So I'm just going to grab this line and I'm going to grab these two planes and then I'm going to isolate these two elements. I click on the isolate element, these three elements actually, and I am isolating it so I don't have the confusion about the other planes. I want to actually make sure that it hits the right reference plane. Of course, if you can do it without isolating, that's cool as well. So I just grab this last point and I lock it to be aligned to this plane. I do the same for this one point and I just grab it and pull it to this plane and I click lock. Then I do the same for this line I am basically isolating it because I don't want to be accidentally locking it for the line instead of plane. So I grab it like this and I lock it to this plane. I do the same for vertical planes as well. So I just lock and I just lock here as well. Next we have this line and we have these vertical planes. I lock it here. And I isolate this plane. I lock everything that I can lock actually. I make sure nothing remains unlocked to some plane, because if you leave out some parts of the locking, if you don't really connect it well to the planes, you can run later on in the problem of actually not being able to create the parameters. So I lock it once again. I make sure everything is locked. And once I have locked everything, I test if my parameters work. So let's see first with the A parameter. It is 80. Let's just make sure it's 100. I click 100 and as you can see, everything has successfully changed. Then let's go with the B. Let's make sure it's 40. And now we can see that the entire family changes the dimensions very easily without leaving anything behind or without anything breaking. Let's try this V to be 120. And this is what it looks, and the only one left to test is actually the height. So let's make sure that height is, for example, 60. And this is what it looks like now. Essentially, we have now created the first part of our family, and the next part is actually creating the new family that we are going to load this family inside. But before we continue with the lesson, let's hear a word of a sponsor, which is also actually me. As you know, I have built a course where I teach you how to go from the basics or intermediate level all the way to the advanced level, where you are able to produce the entire Revit project all on your own or in the company in large teams. In this course, you aren't just watching videos, but you're actively doing exercises that are designed to level up your Revit skill. Each exercise contains the comments panel where you can actually ask questions, and I answer all of these questions the same day. Whether you are a complete beginner or you are transitioning from the AutoCAD or you are the intermediate user of Revit, this course is designed to give you the confidence to start working in Revit fully independently or in the teams. You can check out a list of lessons on the Beam and Tonic website, and I hope to see you in the course. So let's continue with this lesson. So I save this family. I click Save As. I save it to some place on my computer. Now I go and create the new family. So I go to New Family, and this time I am, instead of the detail item, I'm going to take the detail item line based. So I click Open. And now we here have the reference line that we are supposed to actually tie our existing family to. So I will go into this old family and click Load into Project and load it into this new family. And now we have these slats, and I can just kind of place it here in the beginning. It is important to note that since we have all of these reference planes, essentially we will have the snapping to each of these planes. That means when I want to align this family, I now have this reference plane ready to be aligned to this plane. So I click on the align of this line and I tie it to this beginning plane. We already have the length parameter. And now that we have placed this first one, now we go to the array tool. I select this family and I click enter. In the number, it doesn't matter what you type in. I'm just going to type in, for example, 3 so I can see how it looks like, but that part is going to be changed very soon because it is going to be relying on the parameter. So I make sure that this is checked to be the last, and I copy this family all the way to the end. And as you can see, it copied 3 times. Now I choose the align tool again, and I align this last side of the slat to the last plane. Essentially what we get is now that we can change the length, for example 2000. Everything gets stretched equally and it always is having those 3 slats. So the next step is actually making sure that this number of slots actually changes. So I'm going to click one of these items and I click this dimension that is above that says 3. And I am going to now create the parameter. And I'm just going to call it, for example, number of slats. And I'm going to leave it as instance so I can change it easily. I click OK. But now we need to introduce some kind of spacing between those items. So I go to family types and I create the new parameter. I'm going to call it spacing. I also choose instance and I leave it under the dimensions. I click OK and now I'm going to connect this parameter to this one. So first in the spacing I'm just going to assign some number that seems okay to me. And in the number of slats parameter I just create the formula that says length divided by spacing. I click OK. And now, as you can see, we have the increased number of these slats. So essentially, whenever we are changing the dimensions of these slats, we can change the dimension of spacing, and then we can have the family that is fully customizable. But when it comes to actually changing the dimensions of these slats, when I click tab and I find the slat, I can go to edit type and I get all of these parameters that I have created. So I can change it here. For example, instead of 100, I can get this back to 80 or even 50, for example, and height can be, for example, 70. And once I change that, as you can see, slats changed. But if I were to load this family now, let me just first save it before loading it with this generic name. I'm just going to call it the detail line slats and save it. And the problem is with this family right now is that if I were to load it into the project this way, I just load it into the project and I draft it. What we get is actually we are not able to change these dimensions. Essentially, I can only change the slats inside the family editor, but I'm not able to change it in the project editor. I can only change the spacing. So if I were to have, for example, bigger spacing, I can change it here. So in order to be able to change everything in the project, we must actually tie this parameter to some parameters from this project. So if I were to go to edit type, and here let's say I want to be able to change width and height inside the project, I'm going to click on this associate family parameter and I'm going to create the new parameter. I'm also going to call it H and I'm either going to leave it as type or instance, it doesn't matter. I do the same for width and pretty much for all of the other parameters that I need in my project. So I create the new parameter, I make sure it's instance, type would also work, but it's easier for me to explain when it's instance. So I go to the load into project, I load it, I overwrite, and this way, as you can see, now we have these H and V parameters. So if I want to change the height, for example, I can change it to be 90 and the slats changed. I also change the width, for example, 200 and everything changes. I also need this A parameter because that one is actually deciding whether these lines touch. And I'm just going to go back to the edit type and I associate the A parameter as well. So I create the A parameter, I choose instance so I can edit it right away. And I click OK. We can also do the same for B as well. And now if I want to be able to retain this spacing and have the continuous family, I can change the A, for example, to be 130. And this is what our family looks like. It's also amazing that you can actually update it any way you want. You can change each of these parameters to fit your items. This way, when the parameters are instance, you are able to do it right away here, but it is also very handy if you assign the type parameters, and in that way you could just click on edit type, and you can edit these families inside that type. And now the only thing that's left to do in this family is actually change the line style. So I go back to this original family and I go to the manage object styles. I create the new subcategory and I'm going to call it slat lines. I click OK and I assign some line weight, for example, let's say 5, and I assign some color, let's say, for example, this orange, and click OK. And now I select all of these lines and in the subcategory I choose the slat lines. And now it became orange, so I can load it into the main family. I select detail line slats and I load it into that family, and then I load it into the project. I override the existing version, and as you can see, the line style changes. Of course, in the object styles or in the visibility graphics or templates, you can also change that by actually finding the detail items family, and then you can change the line style of these lines. This is very handy because sometimes you don't want to have the same line in each view, in each sheet, so this actually gives you the ability to change these lines depending on the view. For example, we can choose the purple here and click OK, and this is how our line looks like now. Now let's go ahead with the next line, and that is the line with the circles inside of it. It is very similar process, it is very similar way to do it, but there are a few differences that are actually handy to cover in this lesson. So I go to the file, new, and I create the new detail item. I choose metric detail item, click open, and first I'm going to create the circles. So I take the line tool and I simply create one random circle. It doesn't matter how big it is because we are going to be assigning the parameters to it. Now we can just go to object styles and right away create the line style. So I'm going to call it the circle line. Let's give it also the thickness of 5 and let's make sure that it has some different color. I just choose the subcategory of circle line and this is what it looks like. Now it is a little thick, so I will just turn off these lines. What I need next is to add the radial dimension to my family. So I add this radial dimension and I create a parameter. I'm just going to call it the R, and I'm also going to leave it as the type. And now it has this radius, but what we also need to have in this family is actually this little filled region, so it would cover the line beneath it. So I create the new filled region, and since there is no solid white, I'm just going to choose this solid fill black, and I'm going to duplicate it and call it solid fill white. Of course, if you want to have colorful circles, you can do that as well. So I'm going to choose the white color and I click OK. And now I'm going to take the pick lines tool and I'm just going to take this circle and I make sure to lock it for this previous circle, so when I change the parameter, both line and fill region change. So once I, for example, choose 50 here, I just want to make sure that both fill region and lines change. So I go to File, to Save As, and save this family before loading it to the other family. Let's just call it Detail Items Circle. So now I create a new family and I go to File, New Family. And again, I choose the Detail Item line based. And the process is very similar. First we load this family into the new family and I add circle somewhere. Then I'm going to take the line tool and I'm actually going to create the line. I again use the align tool and I make sure that this line is locked to this plane. By default, I can see that it got locked to this length, so I don't need to lock it for these two planes in this case, but if your default family is not locked, then you can do that. And since I do want to have this circle above the line, I will just click bring to front so I don't have this line below visible. I go to manage and object styles, and I will just create the new line style so I can make sure that it is going to be 5 and it's going to have some random color, and I can just click OK. Now I can select this line and I can just turn it into this line style. And we can see for now how it looks. Essentially, we have this circle above this line. And the next step is also creating the arrays and tying this family to some distance. And in the case of previous family, what we had is we had the family begin from the beginning of that detail item. Essentially, I just placed the beginning of that family to the beginning of the main family. But in this case, I don't want that. I do want to start with the line, not the circle. So I am going to create one reference plane, and I'm going to create it somewhere here, for example, and let's say the distance is 100. Next, I am going to align this circle to this plane and I'm going to lock it. And then I'm going to create the new parameter, and I can call it, for example, offset. And I'm going to choose instance, but type will work as well. And I click OK. And now I know that wherever my line starts, basically the circle is going to be offsetted 100 millimeters from it. And then I'm going to copy this to the end of the line, and I am also going to create the parameter. I just select this dimension and I create the offset. And now I am going to go to the array tool. I click on this circle, I click enter, and I also make sure that the last is selected here. I just insert a random number here so it's not 2. And then I just copy this. So I have activated the align tool, and I first click reference plane, and then I click the plane inside the circle. So I lock it in, and this is what it looks like. Essentially, as before, we have the same rules. Basically, we first have to select some item, and then we have to create the parameter from this array. So I create the parameter and I'm just going to call it number of circles. I choose type or instance, it doesn't matter. I click OK. In my family types, I will also create again the spacing. I leave it as these default parameters, and I'm going to choose the instance, and then I'm going to assign it some different distance, for example 200. And now I insert the same formula, so I'm going to go and choose length divided by spacing. I see that I have created the typo, so I just switch the NH. And once it's done, I click OK. And now we can see that all of these are basically divided to 200. So I save this family and I load it into the project. I select my project and I just draw the line. And this is what it looks like now. I can just change the spacing to be a little nicer. And I can also change the offset. For example, if I wanted to start the 200 millimeters from the beginning of the line. And this is what it looks like. I can also go back to family and I can select this circle, go to edit type, and this radius parameter, I can just click here in the associate family parameters, and I can create the R parameter and click OK. And insert it into my project. Now when I load it into the project, I will also be able to change the size of these circles. So if I want to have bigger circles, I can just click 100, for example, and this is what it looks like. And now we have one more family to create, and that is the family with the text in it. So I go to the file, new family, and this time instead of the detail item for our first family, for our simple family, we are going to be using the generic annotation. We use it because we are not able to add the text to the detail item. So I just delete this text. I use the create tool and I create the new label. I make sure to just add it right in the center. I create the new parameter and I'm going to choose the shared parameter so I can bind it across the different files. So I click select and I'm just going to choose the label parameters group and I click edit. I choose this label parameters and I create the new parameters. Of course, if you don't have the group for the labels, you can create the new group parameters. I actually created the tutorial only about shared parameters. It is the shared parameter masterclass. So if you're interested in that topic, I'm going to post it in the description below. And I call this the detail item line label. I make sure that it is text instead of length and I click OK. I click OK once again and I'm just going to choose that parameter and click OK. I'm going to choose instance. I make sure that it is grouped under text and I click OK. I just transfer it here. And instead of sample value, I'm just going to use 3 letters just to make it a little bit shorter so it's not too big. And I click OK. Now I just assign it some font. For example, let's say it's going to be blue and it's going to be Arial narrow. And if you don't want to have this background fill, you can choose the transparent here instead of opaque, but I do need it for this situation. I'm just going to get the font to be 2, so I click OK. And this is what we get. We make sure to drag this border to be as big as we want the value to be. Essentially, you can leave it to be long, but you do want to limit how many characters this text can have, so you can drag it to be a little bit smaller. I save this family. And now I create the new detail item line base, just like before. And click open. And now I create the new line. Just like before, I make sure that it is aligned to this line. I lock it. I make sure that the length works well. And I also create the new object style. So I'm just going to call it the textual line style. It's kind of a weird name, but I guess it's okay. And I make sure to pick some interesting color, let's say something like this, and some good line weight. And I just select it now and I turn it into this line. And now I load the text label in it. I choose this family we have just created and I add the text. But just like before, we can actually create the reference plane for offset because we don't want to be starting from the text. We actually want to have some distance between. So I'm just going to create this 120 dimension and I am going to create the offset parameter. I make sure that it's instance and I also make sure to copy it and to also lock it here by this parameter. Now I make sure that I have aligned my text label to this plane. I also align it to this one and make sure that it is locked so it doesn't move. I go to the array tool and make sure that here I choose last like usually and here I just assign some random number. And now we have this label. I also make sure that I align the last one to this plane. I align it and I lock it. And for the number of these items, I'm going to create the new parameter and I'm just going to call it the number of texts. Text symbol? I don't know. It doesn't matter really. I click Instance and I click OK. I also create the spacing. So I create a new parameter, I choose Instance, I make sure that it's length and dimensions, and I just assign some value, for example 600. And number of text will be, in the end, length divided by spacing. And I click OK. So now we can just make sure that it's a little bit bigger. So we have 3 items and now we can load it into the project. But first we save it so it doesn't load as family 10. And now I load it into the project. I load it into the project tool and I just create the line. And this is what it looks like. Now, in order to be able to actually insert the label to this family, I go to the project parameters and I create the new parameter. I click shared parameters and I'm going to be choosing this label parameter and I'm going to select the parameter that we have just created. So I add it to the detail items and I click OK. And now when I select this family, I am able to insert this label. So if I am going to be, for example, adding the Ella, but despite inserting this value, the text doesn't change. So I go back to this main line style family and I select this and I edit the group. And what I want to do is actually associate family parameter to the shared parameter. So I go to the new parameter and I create one more shared parameter. I choose this label parameters and I choose the one that we have just created and I click OK and I choose instance. I click enter, OK once again and I click finish. I load it into the project and let's see if we are going to have the family text now. And now when I select this family and I insert L, I can now have the text into the family. And what we get with adding this label is the fact that however many families we have, we can actually have the different text in it. We can also change the spacing to be, for example, 800. So this is how you actually create the custom line families. Now I know that this lesson ended up being much longer than I actually expected in the beginning, but actually this masterclass sort of teaches you how to handle the different custom line types of families in your project. And this is it for today's lesson. And if you enjoy my lessons, click like and subscribe. It means a lot for the channel growth. And thank you for watching and see you in the next lesson. Bye! If you want to learn Revit like a pro, take a look at my architectural course through the link below. You will learn how to develop the project from concept to final design using Autodesk Revit. It is ideal for beginners but valuable for anyone looking to build a solid foundation. By the end, you'll know how to take a design from concept to detailed documentation with confidence and clarity. You will gain a solid Revit workflow you can actually use independently or in work in larger teams in architectural studios. With almost 100 structured video lessons, it is designed to help beginners master Revit step by step. To support your progress, I've included assignments with each lesson, plus the opportunity to ask questions and receive guidance directly from me whenever you need it. This way, you're not just watching tutorials, you're actively learning, practicing, and improving every step of the way. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.